Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm SAG-AFTRA Executive Vice President Ben Whitehair. Thank you all for joining us for another SAG-AFTRA live stream on YouTube. To stay current with all of our live stream and video events, we invite you to subscribe to this channel, which you can do right now. Today, as always, we are joined by an American Sign Language interpreter, interpreters, Lindsay Gibbons and Niago Wilson. As a reminder, today's program is being recorded and you can watch the replay or send to your friends right here on SAG-AFTRA's YouTube channel, along with tons of other great content. So today we present the PTEOE, President's Task Force on Education Outreach and Engagement live stream, What's in the Netflix Agreement? As I'm sure many of you know already, SAG-AFTRA's National Board reviewed the tentative agreement with Netflix and recommended a yes vote. And now it is your turn. Members who are eligible to vote received a postcard looking like this in the mail with voting instructions. Voting is open until 5 p.m. Pacific on Wednesday, August 31st. Even if you're not eligible to vote on this particular agreement, stick with us. Your first Netflix gig could be right around the corner. To help you make an informed decision, we're going to spend some time breaking down all of the amazing wins in the new agreement. And to help us do that, we have with us SAG-AFTRA National Vice President, Los Angeles, Michelle Hurd, SAG-AFTRA National Executive Director and Chief Negotiator, Duncan Crabtree, Ireland, and SAG-AFTRA Chief Contracts Officer, Ray Rodriguez. We also received questions from our members. We'll try to get to as many of those as possible in our time. Michelle, Duncan, Ray, thank you so much for being here for this very important conversation. Shall we go ahead and dive in?
Let's do it.
Yes,
let's
do
great.
It.
So many things to be excited about with this new agreement. I want to start with a little bit of context about this contract. Duncan, can you tell us a little bit about the history of the Netflix agreement and what does and maybe does it not cover?
Sure. Thanks, Ben. The Netflix agreement goes back to 2019. So it's not, it's a fairly new agreement. And it was a groundbreaking agreement at that time as well, because the Netflix agreement was the first time that a streamer had entered into a direct collective bargaining agreement with an industry union. And in fact, our Netflix agreement to this day remains we remain the only union that has our own freestanding agreement with Netflix. And that was important, especially at that time, because really, as I think all of our members know, the changes to the industry have been wrought by the advent of the streaming business model. And there's a lot in this agreement, especially the one we're going to talk about today, this current one we just negotiated, that really addresses the impact of those changes in the business. And doing that with sort of the leader in the streaming world is really important. Back in 2019, Netflix was by far the biggest and most successful streamer out there. Obviously, the competitors to Netflix have started to catch up over the last 3 years, and the industry is changing a lot as a result. But I think the agreement then was seen as groundbreaking, and it really was groundbreaking. The agreement today, I think, is also groundbreaking, and I'm really excited for us to dig into the changes to the Netflix agreement we're going to talk about over the next hour or so.
Awesome. Thank you, Duncan. Ray, what were some of the priorities going into negotiations and some of the other big wins? And for context for anybody watching, I just want to highlight that as with all of our contract negotiations, a lot of these priorities, or I suppose all of the priorities really are member driven. There are, listening sessions, obviously lots of conversations in between negotiations. So from all of those, Ray, what were some of the priorities that came out of that?
Sure. So certainly we had a background community that was very focused on the idea that there ought to be background coverage in the Albuquerque area, where Netflix now has a studio, and we anticipate they will be using that facility, and as well because of the tax credits that exist in New Mexico. So that was certainly on our minds. As well, there was pending legislation with the California Assembly that was there to address the challenges that we were having in the area of exclusivity and options for series regulars. And so the timing, I think that would have been a priority regardless for this negotiation, but the timing certainly supported emphasizing those issues because there was an opportunity there. We had in 2019 attempted to bargain for coverage of Spanish language dubbing in the Netflix dubbing agreement. That was not successful in 2019, but it was certainly something that we had not forgotten about and that we were looking for an opportunity to achieve. So that was another priority and one of the things we were able to address in the negotiation. And finally, I'll mention stunt coordinator residuals. That's something that we have pursued in AMPTP negotiations for a number of cycles, and that we certainly were looking for the opportunity to have a breakthrough on. And we were able to address that as well during this negotiation.
If I can just add to that, Ben, I think that, what the point that Ray makes is really, really great, that this and all negotiations are about seeing the pathways to achieving things that otherwise would be impossible or hard to achieve. And both the legislation with the Law Act and the impact on our ability to negotiate for options and exclusivity, and then also those other pieces that Ray just mentioned, all, those were opportunities that we had uniquely in this negotiation to move the ball forward in very real ways in a number of areas that have been real roadblocks and obstacles over not just the last round of bargaining with Netflix, but going back 2 and 3 cycles with the AMPTP. And so it's a really exciting example of taking advantage of those opportunities and really locking in gains that I think are meaningful both now and long term.
Yeah. One of those gains was around vocal stress for dubbing performers. And Michelle, I'm curious, I'm sure plenty of people watching know, but for anybody who hasn't maybe been in this situation, can you talk about how important the vocal stress provisions are?
Yeah. Just before I tap in there, one of the things that Ben and both Duncan and Ray just said, and I want everybody to think about, is that we utilized what was available to us now to strengthen our abilities to negotiate for the things that we've gained, right? Now, did we get every single thing that we wanted? No, but just like what Duncan and Ray said, we had tried to attack those things back in the day. We weren't able to, and then we were able to now. So even things that we weren't able to get now, we will still seek out later. So, it's how we open discussions. It's how we gain footage. We get mileage by these different negotiations, and we always have our eye on the prize. So it's never like we finish a negotiation, go, well, that's it. No, we have more things to, always trying to strengthen our contracts and empower our actors. One of the things that was so great about these negotiations is that we were able to really listen to our members and find out what was really bothering them and what they were really needing help for. This vocal stress is one of the things that came out of our WWs, and we had some people in our negotiations where we were able to tell us specific stories. And I always hope that our union members will call us and let us know in real time things that are happening, because this is how we can implement change. Some of the things that were happening in dubbing is that, producers think that actors are machines and that we can just sort of go into a booth and just kind of, go about, screaming and yelling and emoting for hours on end without, with barely a pee break, and that's just unacceptable. Anybody who does dubbing knows that there's an actual tasking, it really puts strain on your vocal cords, and, you need to take care of that. So what we were able to get is that there's no longer, you can't do more than 2 hours of dubbing, and it can't be paid no less than 2.5 hours in that session. So, this is a major gain, because it's now not the Wild West where they can just sort of book you for the whole day and that you're just kind of, blowing out your vocal cords. And that's kind of the focus that we really all took when negotiating as a body of this agreement. It was all about protections, safety, and empowerment of our actors in all these different categories. And I really feel like we achieved that in such an amazing way. And I hope everybody really understands that and is excited as I am.
Absolutely. It also, that vocal stress makes it harder to get other work. If your vocal cords are shot, you're like, I can't work tomorrow, and I could have done, it costs members work. So I love that, not only is there more money for, the same way that other types of taxing work can have, added monetary compensation, but that it's limited so that we can protect people to be able to keep working. Ray, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I think you made one of the points that I wanted to add to that it impacts your next job. And that is part of the reason why it's important to protect against vocal stress. And the other reason why I would encourage all performers to take that very seriously is it can do long-term damage. We have had expert ear, nose, and throat doctors that specialize in treating vocal stress come do presentations for the union where they have shown photographs, and they even did a live scoping once of someone's vocal cords that had vocal stress. And it will only take you seeing those pictures once to convince you that vocal stress is a serious issue, that our performers need to protect their voices, and we need to have terms that help them protect their voices, because like you say, it impacts your next gig and it can do long-term damage if you don't take it seriously.
Absolutely. Duncan, this agreement includes unprecedented gains for Spanish language dubbers. I'd love it if you could talk a little bit more about that. You can do it in both English and Spanish if you want. I know you're capable of that, but would love to hear more about the gains in that.
Sure. No, I appreciate it, Ben. And I think this is a really important gain in this agreement for a number of reasons. Let me just start off with the question of equity. Because one of the things that we have been searching for and fighting for in our contracts for a long time, but especially with a focus on Spanish language over the last, say, 6 to 8 years, has been trying to achieve equal terms for the work being done in both English and Spanish. Because the fact of the matter is that in a lot of cases, that has not been the reality for our members who work in Spanish language. That was part of our campaign with the organizing of Telemundo Network. Just this year in our commercials contract, we were able to equalize almost all of the terms for Spanish language work in commercials. And now in this agreement, we have been able to expand the coverage of the Netflix agreement to include not only English language dubbing, but also Spanish language dubbing. And that's so important for a number of reasons. One reason is it's going to be at exactly the same terms. So whether you're doing English language dubbing or Spanish language dubbing, equal treatment. And I think that is important in the context of Netflix, but it's also important as a principle and as something that I hope will be an inspiration to other employers in the industry to help us move towards those types of terms, towards equal treatment of our members working in both languages. Second of all, it's really important because the Netflix dubbing terms are very favorable dubbing terms. The result of this in comparison to our Spanish language dubbing agreement is that there'll be a very, very sizable increase in compensation for Spanish language dubbers in order to equalize that work. For a long time, our Spanish language dubbing contract hasn't moved up in terms of its compensation. And the reason for that is the concern on the part of the community that that work may leave the United States as a result of increasing terms. In other words, competition with other dubbers outside the United States who aren't working under union contracts. The beauty of this agreement with Netflix is that we have assurances from Netflix that this work is not going to go anywhere as a result of it moving under the Netflix agreement. And so our members can happily and without any kind of worry or fear that this work is going to leave as a result of this, accept the significant gains in their compensation and the working conditions that this dubbing is done under. So really, it's an extraordinary achievement. It broadens the scope of our dubbing coverage. It'll create a lot of new union jobs for doing Spanish language dubbing for Netflix. And I think is also setting a trend in the right direction towards equalizing terms for Spanish language and English language work. So it's really an extraordinary win, and I'm very proud of it.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know that's been a big fight for the union. I mean, we talk about equity and inclusion, and this is the way that we make that a reality. Say, hey, no, you actually need to pay performers just because they speak another language doesn't mean that they should be paid less. So I think that's so important. Before I switch over to Michelle on the topic of exclusivity, Ray, will you also just outline the baseline gain in like the minimum hour for dubbing? We talked about the vocal stress provisions and the Spanish language, but would love to hear as well just about the other gain that we made in dubbing.
Sure. So effective July 1st of next year, the minimum guaranteed length of a dubbing session will go from 2 hours, which is the shortest session you can schedule and pay for now, to 3 hours. So what that adds up to is an increase in the minimum that you can be paid for a dubbing session of 50%. That is effective on July 1st of next year. And that is definitely something that the dubbing performers brought to us as a concern, was just the money and trying to increase their minimums. And that's the way we went about doing it. And by the way, the actual hourly rate will also continue to increase by the amount of the minimum increases in our AMPTP deal. So we will see that baseline rate also go up.
Who doesn't like a 50% raise? Okay, Michelle, a topic that's been getting a lot of buzz in the industry, exclusivity. Can you give us some context?
Yeah.
What is exclusivity? How does it impact actors? Why is this such an issue? I know you have had personal experience yourself, along with many of our performers who, as our friend Stacey Travis will say, you're one phone call away from this being your issue. So can you just wrap some context around this for us?
That's right. One phone call away. Yeah, this is one that we got lots of feedback from a huge amount of our members, myself included. And just to put a sort of a clear glass of what we're talking about here, a focus on it. Back in the day, when we produced 22 to 24 episodes a season, shows were basically crafted to drop during the fall, which is when new car vehicles would be announced. Okay, so like just wrap your head around that. That's how the sort of template of television programming was created. Well, we all know that the cars are introduced all during the 365 days, so that doesn't really work anymore. We also know now that shows are not 22 and 24 episodes. So there's no longer sort of a guarantee of 9 months of shooting. Back when there was that, you'd have 9 months of shooting and a few months off. And so you may not want to even do any other work, or maybe you do a play or maybe a movie. Well, now the new template, the majority of the time, is that we shoot a 10 episode, anywhere from 10 to 13 or 6 to 13 episodes. And it takes us about 4 to 5 months. Now, those, we do that work in 5 months, and then we are sort of in limbo, just kind of waiting to find out if we are picked up again, if the show is picked up again, because remember, the show could be picked up again, but maybe the individual is not picked up. There's no sort of guidelines. There has been no guidelines as to how long we could wait. We have many, many, many members, myself included, where you shoot for those 5 months. We have those 10 episodes, and you're literally kind of held in this non-working limbo actor land for 1, 2, even 3 years, a period of time. And I don't know how many people are watching here are in the age that I am, but 2, 3 years go by, and that's a big chunk of your castability and my contribution to my career. So exclusivity has been a way that our employers, in my mind, have kind of shackled us to them. That's not fair. That's not allowing me to procure my own work, to have a say in my career. If I'm only working for 5 months, then those 7 months I should be able to get guest stars and films and second position first series regulars. I should be able to, bounce from the success of the job that I just had into contributing to my future career. So that's what exclusivity means. I mean, the word almost doesn't sound nice, right? It's like you are exclusive to me and nobody else. And that's what exclusivity is, just in a nutshell.
Very, very helpful. Thank you for that, Michelle. Ray, tell us the good news on exclusivity.
Tell us.
Sure. So as Michelle was saying, the series regulars during those long timelines that she's describing, where they're not working on their series and not getting paid, are held to these exclusivity rules that basically prevent them from doing other work. The collective bargaining agreement did have some minimums in it in terms of what work you had to retain the right to do under your series deal, so that you could do some work outside of your series. But those minimums only applied to people who were making $40,000 per episode or per week or less. And so we needed to be able to increase, that's called a money break. We needed to be able to increase that money break so that more series regulars would benefit from those minimums in the agreement of work that you have to retain. So we increased those money breaks to $65,000 per episode or per week for a half-hour program, and $70,000 for an hour or longer program. So many more series regulars will benefit from the collectively bargained rules. And then the work that you were able to do once those rules benefit you is substantially increased in this deal, so that it went from, used to be able to do 8 guest stars every 13 weeks, with 5 of those being in a continuing role. You can now do unlimited guest stars, and you can do an unlimited number of continuing roles as long as it's not more than 6 episodes in a series. So that is very substantially opened up. And even more significantly, in addition to that, you can do either a second position series regular job or a second position lead in a miniseries, and that's every calendar year. So it's greatly opened up what you're able to do. Those are called permitted appearances. Those permitted appearances are subject to conditions, and the conditions were also relaxed and liberalized so that the basis on which your Netflix producer could say no to a permitted appearance have been greatly reduced. And there is an ongoing commitment to work cooperatively with you to get to the point where those conditions can be surmounted and you can take the job. And so that was so the reduction of those conditions was very important. In addition to that, we addressed the options side of the house. The options side of the house, the exclusivity side talks about how tight those exclusivity restrictions are going to be. The option side talks about how long they're going to last. And when Michelle talks about, well, we're waiting to see if the next season is going to come or not, that has to do with your option exercise deadline. When do they have to tell you that there's going to be another season and that you're employed on it? And you're exclusive the whole while you're waiting. And so we were able to tighten up those deadlines. It's complicated how you define it, but basically we shifted the way it gets counted so that you start ticking away at that clock when you start principal photography on the season rather than when principal photography ends. They then went from a 12 to an 18-month window, but the ability to extend was reduced and made more expensive. And probably the most important change that we made there, the contract already had an option exercise deadline, which, as I'm saying, we've made it more favorable to the actor when that deadline is, but it contained no deadline for how soon they actually had to start you on your next season of work once they exercised your option. And people were waiting long periods of time. I exercise your option, then 5 months, 6 months longer goes by before I say, okay, we're actually starting now. And now we have a deadline for that. So it has to be within 3 months that they start you, and then they can extend that by up to 2 months in exchange for an episodic fee. But so now there's a timeline around that too. So we have made the timing much more favorable at the same time as we've reduced the restrictions that are applicable while you're under option.
That is a lot of good news. And I know, for so many of us, the dream is to be in that situation. And I have been talking to some friends recently who that happened, and they booked their first series gig and then are really challenged. It's like, oh, I'm making finally, good money and steady work. And then it's like, well, wait, stretching that out over 2-3 years and not knowing when I'm going back and not knowing how to plan my life and not knowing what money I'm going to make. So the fact that we have not only reduced what can happen there, but have, in a situation where they need to pay for it. Hey, if you want to extend it, you can. It's going to cost you money though. Michelle, I'm curious, as a working actor, on set with, other working actors in your family and otherwise, what did these improvements to exclusivity terms mean to you? What do you think the impact's going to be?
I think the impact's going to be profound. I mean, one of the things that we've found over the years is that actors, and I think this is important to sort of understand, because what we've been trying to do in all of our negotiations here is to help the many, right? So we try to get as much numbers and information to find out, how many people can we help if we move things around. One of the things that Ray was talking about when you heard 65 and 75K, and that sounds like, woo, that's a lot of money. Lord knows I'd like to be making that. But what it means is that above that amount, those are the people that we think of like the stars, and they can freely negotiate. Nobody asks them, gives them, there's not a lot of obstacles for them. They get to negotiate whatever they want. It's the people below the line. That's what we hear, below the line. So now it's that money and below that had no ability to freely negotiate things and to procure work. Now we have been able to create a body of people, a number of people that these benefits are going to affect. I have been systemically underpaid, high woman of color, for decades, and this stuff now will help me get other work. So now I'm allowed to look for work rather than trying to, sustain my life on the underpaid amount of money that I got for the 10 episodes for the 5 months that I shot. And now I'm having to wait. And just to get a little more clear about that waiting period of options exclusivity kind of world of what Ray just said, and also just to understand how hard won this was, entering into this negotiations, there was a concept offered to us of waiting about 4D months, like a 40 months after working, that they wanted to tie us to in order to let you know whether your show was going to be picked up or not, or whether you were going to get picked up or not, which is just, it makes your head spin, because 40 months, I mean, I don't understand, what does that mean? I'm supposed to flounder for all that time. So what Ray just said is that now we have, from the beginning of Principles Photography, that's when the clock starts, from the beginning of Principles Photography, and that's 18 months. So if it's 6 months of shooting, then you're now at 12 months. And then they have to, there's twice they can extend it, 3 times, sorry, 3 times they can extend it for 3 months. But you're now actually getting paid. You get an episodic check. Not from your next season coming up, just what you would be making in your episodic. You get a holding fee. Now, people could say, well, I want more money, whatever. We never got any money before. We never got any money before. So now we actually are going to get paid for a holding period. And remember what I said, we don't always get everything that we want at the first, first go at it. But all these things are building blocks. And we have changed the template on how they presented their business form to us. And we have now said, excuse me, we are the actors. We have to have power as well. We should be empowered to be able to have control over our careers, to have a say in what my next job is, and have a say in what I want to do, how I want to create, how I want to present myself into the industry. And now say I'm doing a procedural, and that's what my series regular show is. On my off season, there's a now conflict-free zone, which I call the cruelty-free zone, but the conflict-free zone where you can now get work, unlimited guest stars, a second position series regular. This is unprecedented. This is huge gains. We now have the ability to do that without even talking to them. We have the ability now to do work on different genres, and they can't. There was a moment where I'm doing Star Trek, and I wanted during my hiatus to do another show that happened to be sci-fi. I was denied that because it was said to be sci-fi, same genre. They can no longer do that. So say if you're playing a mom in your series regular, you still can play a mom on some other series in a different network or show, TV series. This is huge. This now gives us the power. The controls are back in the actor's hands, which is where it should be. Because, I know you guys know I'm an actor, but from my point of view, the shows are successful because the casting did a great job of hiring the right actors. The right actors. We bring life to the stories. Not the other way around. We bring life. So our employers are very lucky to have us. And the more that we can get eyes on us from different shows and different networks and different eyes on us, the more we benefit the show that we are signed to. So it's a win-win situation for everybody. But the best part is that the control is now back in the actor's hand to have the ability to procure work and not have to wait around till someone decides whether not only is the show going to be picked up, but are you going to be picked up as well?
For me, the reason I volunteer my time with SAG-AFTRA is because we can do things like this where, we've talked about, for background performers, the stunt community dubbing community, all of us actors who are a phone call away from that next series, that we have gains that have a material impact on our paychecks and our life and ability to get work. A lot of that happens because of a tremendous amount of thought and strategy. And Duncan, in that lens, I'm curious to hear from you your thoughts on how are we able to finally move the needle on all of these things, and specifically here with exclusivity, because I know it's been something that we've been fighting for a long time.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. It's a really great question, and we have. I mean, we've been fighting for this and bargaining for over 10 years. So why now? And the answer to why now is really strategy that was put in place, that was launched more than 2 years ago. There was really a broad view taken of what we could do to try and get past the roadblocks on exclusivity and also options. And we looked at various things. We looked at litigation. Ultimately, what we came up with was a legislative strategy, which, as I mentioned, launched in the California legislature about 21 months ago. And it was a very specific legislative strategy, which was to generate the kind of leverage that we needed in order to negotiate something that would be meaningful to our members, would actually get this issue resolved through bargaining. But with the other benefit being that if that weren't successful, we would have some improvements in this that would come out of the legislation if those negotiations weren't successful. The legislation was hard fought. So many of our members and our staff worked so hard to keep that legislation moving forward. It went through a number of iterations, and we'll go into all the process parts of it. But the bottom line is, as a result of that really hard work and of getting the commitment and support of our members, talking to legislators, explaining the issue, explaining what Michelle so beautifully explained earlier is the problem that needed to be solved, we were able to see that legislation through to the point where we actually got the leverage we needed to negotiate a very favorable resolution to this with Netflix, and although it's not part of this agreement, likewise with the AMPTP, so that these exclusivity changes that we've been talking about here really will affect the entire industry, and also has the side benefit of being applicable to all of these collective bargaining agreements anywhere in the world that our members are working on them, not only in California. So really, it was a brilliant bit of strategy. It was led by our general counsel, Jeffrey Bennett, from the staff side, and by our president, Fran Drescher, and others. It was initiated by our prior executive director, David White, and then President Gabriel Carteris. There was just so many people involved in this to make it happen. I can't name all of them, but it was really it's a beautiful moment when a strategy like that comes together. The timing works perfectly, the substance works perfectly, and as a result, you see that kind of outcome. Now, that doesn't happen every time. Sometimes if you're gonna, take big swings, sometimes you're gonna have misses. But this one was an example where everything lined up perfectly, and as a result, we got this achievement. Let's talk about the other pieces, Ben, because you mentioned that as well. We had some of the things that we talked about as the big gains here are things that are hard to negotiate for. I won't go into the technical reasons, but there's legal reasons why some of them you can't, for example, use job actions to try and get. They can only be done voluntarily by the employer and the union coming together to do them. And in this case, there was an opportunity because of the timing of the negotiations, the fact that Netflix was become a member of the AMPTP, that we were able to secure some of those groundbreaking achievements that would be really hard to do in a negotiation where you didn't have that additional piece of leverage as well. So really what I would just say is the negotiating committee and all of the negotiating team just took advantage of every bit of leverage that we could find to achieve the gains that we have in this agreement. And I am confident that not one penny was left on the table in this process, metaphorically or literally.
Love it. I think it's helpful for members to know that there really are both, the short-term focus of, hey, I didn't get paid on this job. Hey, this set is unsafe. Like there are short-term, this thing is happening today. I need help. Staff is on the phone on set helping out. And also the very big picture, long-term, how do we make sure we continue to shift as the economy shifts and the industry shifts?
Ben, can I just add to that to say, in case anybody out there is wondering or they didn't track this part, there are still a lot of other pieces that will be negotiated as part of the industry-wide negotiations that are coming up. in just a few months with the AMPTP. So I just want to make sure people know that when you look at the Netflix agreement is full of things that are specific only to Netflix. So when we talk about things like broad industry wage scales, or we talk about the structure of residuals for streaming, those are things that are negotiated industry-wide and not only just for Netflix. And so that's why we're not talking about those today. But for people who are interested in those topics, which I'm pretty sure a lot of our members are, we will be having a full wages and working conditions process and lots of opportunities for dialogue with members before we launch into those negotiations with the AMPTP in the coming months.
Yeah, for those of you who've been watching these PTEOEs, you've heard me say it before, but showing up at those W&W wages and working conditions for any contract that you care about, that is where we kicked this conversation off with, hey, what were our priorities going in and where do those come from? And, you know, it's driven by us, by members, by saying, hey, this is what's happening in the industry. This is what I'm seeing. This is what it's like on set. This is what it's like auditioning. So would absolutely encourage everybody to, when you see those emails, when you see it posted on the socials of SAG-AFTRA, attending those, I think, is really important. One of those issues, Duncan, you talked about it earlier, inclusivity. In that instance around our Spanish language performers. Michelle, yes, you've been an outspoken champion of equality and equity and inclusion, and have talked about the inequities in the film and TV industry. Mm-hmm. What does the addition of the Juneteenth holiday as a contractual holiday that was added, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, that means a whole bunch. Before I say anything, I just want to reiterate what Ben and Duncan just said. We are empowered when we hear what our members' needs are. Please, everybody, attend the WW, get involved with union work. In real time, let us know what's going on. It's funny, when I get to sets, people find out that I'm on the SAG-AFTRA board and they go, oh, you know, I want to say something. There's something I want or whatever. And it's, you know, I'm standing on set with you. There's not much I can do in that moment. So if you guys just get involved in the union and let us know what's going on. I have big ears and I want to help everybody. And that's one of the reasons as well as the fact that I'm a woman of color, that I'm constantly, when I'm in these rooms, I am speaking from a BIPOC POV, from LGBTQ and empowerment, neurodiverse individuals. I want everybody in the room so that we can have a really learned and informed conversation. Speaking about informed, I wanted to read this so that people who don't know what Juneteenth is can sort of get a grasp on it and understand why it's so important. So Juneteenth, or Freedom Day, is the oldest nationally celebrated commemoration of the ending of slavery in the United States. It's kind of a big thing. This holiday is considered the longest running African-American holiday and has been called America's second Independence Day. So that's a little bit of an insight as to how come this is such an important step for us. The fact that we have now are going to be able to celebrate Juneteenth, it means that those of us, people of color, are being acknowledged and respected, and that our struggle has been has not validated, but is we understand the importance of acknowledging it, of revisiting it, of speaking out of it, and understanding why it's important to honor the change that happened in 1865. You know, it's 2022 and we're still just scratching our way up the hill. I mean, if you think about what I just said, 1865, and it's now 2022, and we're now acknowledging, we've now been able to get this as a holiday. That's a lot. So, you know, I feel like optics matter, actions matter. When we put our money where our mouth is, our actions where our hearts are, more people feel that they're included, that they're empowered, that they're understood, that they're seen. And this is the way that we really empower our body of artistry, as well as the world, because the world looks onto us. And art is that's the natural language. It's the most universal language all around. So if we can encompass this and embrace this in our industry, then hopefully the whole world will sort of see that acknowledging the history of diversity and of the good and the bad that we've all traveled through can only empower us and keep us on a safer path moving forward.
Wonderfully said. I really appreciate everybody's thoughts and insights into not just this contract, but where it fits into the larger landscape of our industry. I want to go to some member questions. The first one I'm going to send over to
Ben,
Ray.
before we go to member questions, can we just two things, if I may? First, I got so excited when I was talking about the Spanish language dubbing. I failed to take you up on your suggestion that we say something to our Spanish language community. So if I could just do that real quick, that would be great.
Please.
Which is, sí, quiero decir a nuestros miembros de habla hispana que los logros en este contrato, en este acuerdo con Netflix, son muy significativos. Claro, la aumentación de los salarios de más de 400% son muy importantes, pero también pienso que el principio de la equidad y la inclusividad en tener salarios igual sobre el trabajo de habla hispana y habla inglesa es muy importante, y es un principio que nosotros vamos a continuar a luchar en todos nuestros contratos. And I also want to just say, Ben, if I can, before we move on, that our members of our negotiating committee really deserve a special shout out. And as probably our membership at large knows, we don't announce the names of those individuals out of just to protect them, because of course these are working performers who we don't want them to be at risk from employers or anybody else. President Fran Drescher was the chair of that committee. We had a really outstanding committee of very, very dedicated working performers, members who volunteer their time to do this negotiation. It took many weeks, meetings on weekends, meetings in evenings. They were just so dedicated and committed. And I have to say, from my point of view, it was an extraordinary committee of incredibly dedicated people who worked to negotiate this agreement. I just want to express my appreciation, and I think all of our collective appreciation for them.
Thank you for that, Duncan. I've already said publicly that I was part of this committee, and just to say, it is very heartening as a member to see SAG-AFTRA walking the walk. And not just talking the talk. You know, it was an important priority for Fran. It's been an important priority for the union, but to see the diversity of categorical representation of, you know, racial and ethnic background, of sexual and gender orientation, like all of the different things, like, hey, as Michelle said, it's just a better way to do things. It's not, you know, when you get a diverse group of people in the room, you get better ideas. You have a better sense of what all of our members are facing, you know, from anywhere where you are in your career to the different ways that our lived experiences affect us. And as a member, I'll throw gratitude back to staff as well. You know, the number of late hours and weekends and stepping away from families and on vacations to make sure that this could happen, and to go into the conversations with Netflix, and to be bringing, you know, a tremendous amount of diverse thought and strategy into those conversations is what, you know, all of that teamwork from members and staff and the input that came from everybody leading up to that, you know, to me is what allowed us to have so much success. And I'm very, very grateful for that. Question from members. Lots of them. We're going to get through as many as we can. The first one I'm going to send over to Ray. We talked about some of the gains that we had for series regulars and background actors. I'm curious, Ray, some of the, we've touched on some of them, but other gains for members outside of the series regulars and background performers that we talked about.
Sure. I mean, we talked about a lot of gains for dubbers, and that is, you know, a middle-class community of performers making their living under the dubbing agreement or supplementing their living under the dubbing agreement. So they will have substantial improvements. And as well, the gains for stunt coordinators who now have access to a fixed residual. And we haven't talked a lot about that, but that is another item where the union has attempted cycle after cycle to make progress for this group of our members. And it is a circumstance where they were able to share in revenue-based residuals where it didn't cost the producers any extra money because it's a pool that just gets divvied up. Here, we have made progress in the area of a fixed residual, where every residual that gets paid out under this new formula is money that wasn't being paid out yesterday. It's added cost that makes it a harder breakthrough. And for our stunt coordinators who are often feeling pressure, you know, do I have to put myself on camera to perform a stunt? rather than remaining focused on my duties as a stunt coordinator, they now have an option to not have to do that and still get a residual that they very much deserve for their work. So that was another, proposal that really benefited, middle-class performers or not the series regulars of TV shows.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Ray. I know the union members have been fighting for the stunt community, and I think this is a really big win. As Michelle said, there's always more to be done. There's always more work. But I think, like you said, this was something that when I first started my union service, I didn't always understand, the different residual pieces there. And so just to reiterate what Ray said, this is new money. This is a new cost to our employers that they need to pay our stunt coordinators that, is a very big win compared to, well, sure, if you all just want to divvy it up differently, sure, you can throw them in there. And it's like, no, you need to pay these stunt coordinators new money that they very much deserve. So I appreciate you explaining that. Duncan, Ray, I'm curious, you talked about, I don't know if you mentioned, you've maybe mentioned in other places, I don't remember if you said it today, that, this was the background zone in Albuquerque is, very historic. The first gain like this in a couple decades. And one of the member questions was, can we expect to see more new background zones in the future? And kind of what's the context of that gain?
Well, one of the reasons why it's been so long since there's been an added background zone is it's one of those types of issues that I mentioned earlier that have a sort of special legal status called non-mandatory subject to bargaining. And that, as a result, means that we can only do certain things to try and achieve them. We can't use the full range of tools in our toolkit to try and make those things happen, which means we have to be extra strategic about it. And this is an example of that, where we had an opportunity to make that happen due to the timing and the context of Netflix joining the AMPTP. So I think my answer would be, we're going to always be on the lookout for opportunities like that. We certainly hope that this breakthrough will give us the opportunity to try and bring some additional background zones into play. Rather than using the term expect, I think what we can say is that we will continue to look for those opportunities, and whenever possible, we will certainly seek to achieve them. And we may have to pursue other methods for getting background coverage in other areas over time as well. So it's really part of a broader strategic effort. But I hope that the background community will realize that the fact that this background zone is included in this agreement is a sign of the fact that we are always looking for that opportunity. And whenever it is available to us, we will pursue it.
And I would just add to that, if I could, Ben, that the background members in Albuquerque and in New Mexico have been very active over the years. They succeeded in getting a New Mexico Background Actors Bill of Rights that many organizations have expressed their support for, including ours. So there was also a component of on-the-ground organizing here, where the members themselves in that area who wanted that coverage got together and helped create some of the pressure and the leverage to get that done.
Member involvement, I love it. Solidarity within our community makes such a big difference, and I love seeing when that leads to real meaningful change. And I've had the great fortune of working in New Mexico and Albuquerque quite a bit, and I'm very excited that those performers who are working very hard have additional protections and payment and coverage. Another member question we had, probably for Ray. Michelle, you might have some thoughts, but the question is, what are some of the reasons that Netflix can say no to letting an actor work on another project? For myself, how is that different than what it was before?
Sure. So the first and most obvious answer to that is because there's a schedule conflict between that project and your work on the series. And that remains a condition. You still do have to clear your schedule, except for the conflict-free window. Michelle mentioned that before. That is an innovation in this contract, where every year you have to be given a period of at least 3 months and possibly longer, during which you no longer have to clear your schedule with Netflix. And that really opens up casting opportunities for those series regulars, because now you can confidently commit to your schedule, which is obviously helpful for the process of getting cast. People want to know that you are available for the work. Another of the limitations is that it cannot be a substantially similar role. Michelle mentioned earlier that she ran into that in a circumstance where merely the fact that it was another science fiction series was enough to convince that producer that she ought to be denied that opportunity. That cannot happen anymore. We have added a definition of what substantially similar means that makes it clear that if it's just the same genre or just the same type of, you're a mom in both shows, that will not suffice. And there's language of what has to be taken into consideration before you can make the determination that the role is substantially similar. One of the things that was removed that I think is probably the most significant condition that was taken out was that there was the ability previously to say no if the other show was for another streaming service, a pay television service, or a linear channel where they had the rights to stream it within 30 days of the initial exhibition. And, for those of you who are familiar with what TV looks like, that's like almost the whole thing. If you add those categories together, that is a lot of what's going on in the world of television today. And that prohibition got completely removed. So it was called the competing platform restriction is gone. So that's no longer a basis on which the producer can say no to you. The promotional restriction was another important one that got addressed, where there was a rule that you couldn't be in the promotional material for the other show, which is, again, a real casting limitation, because a lot of times part of the reason why the other show wants you is so that they can put in the promo on next week's episode of XYZ show. We have Michelle Hurd, and that's a reason for people to come watch the next episode. So that was a problem. That got narrowed very substantially. You can now be in the promotional material for the other episode, as long as you are not alone or more prominent than other people in that promotional material. You can still be there. So that's helps a lot in terms of getting cast. And I guess the last thing I would mention is something that was retained in the agreement, which I think is very important, and that is a requirement that Netflix work cooperatively with you, not use any of these conditions as a basis for automatic rejection, but actually work with you to get to the point where they can say yes. Even if one of those conditions is violated, they have to try to say yes with you, and they have to keep a record of all the requests and what they said, and those records have to be provided for inspection by the union twice a year. So we can keep them honest when they tell us, hey, we're talent friendly, we really want to work with your performers to help them get as many work opportunities as possible. Well, they have to keep a record, we get to inspect that, and we get to test that they're really doing that. And so, those changes taken together really amount to a substantial expansion in the type of work that now our members can go do even while they're on a Netflix series.
Yeah, just want to say all that he just said, and just to sort of put that in sort of a closer focus, we've now really empowered the actors to procure work, you guys. Like, we can do that now. And Netflix has agreed that they're going to work with us to make sure that we can get that procure other jobs. I want us all to know this and to learn this information. If everybody votes yes and we get this all codified, so you tell your agents, so you tell your managers, that you educate them as well, so that when there's a possibility of getting a second gig during your hiatus and they go, it's probably not going to, there's going to be a conflict, you go, no. Not only do I have the power to say yes, my union has my back. Remember, they're going to have to put those things, the reasons that they say no, down on a piece of paper, and we're going to look at them. We're going to look at them twice a year and go, this was cockapoo. So this is important, you guys.
I am curious if anybody has any closing thoughts before we wrap up here today.
Well, I think, Ben, I would just say, we haven't talked about it a lot because this is obviously about the Netflix agreement, but I would just say that, a lot of the provisions are very similar between the Netflix agreement and the just announced agreement that we have with the AMPTP on this point. There are some differences that primarily relate to children's programming, but other than that, the concepts are very much the same as far as it relates to exclusivity. The AMPTP part is only focused on exclusivity. But I think, to the point that Michelle just made and that we've been talking about, this is really a sea change in how the industry is going to be dealing with performers with respect to exclusivity issues. And I think that is hugely meaningful. I mean, there's sort of the important, big, flashy pieces like the conflict-free window. I mean, this is something that only super powered negotiation leverage performers could get before, that now it's going to be a common feature for all series regulars that fall within the money breaks that Ray talked about earlier. But also some of the things that are like less flashy in the document are nonetheless really important. And I think probably the one, and what inspired me to mention this was what Michelle just said, the contractual commitment on the part of not only Netflix, but all of the AMPTP companies to work with performers to make it possible for them to do this. That's something that did not exist before. And that's really important. And it is something that as the representative of performers and the people whose job it is to look out for performers, we're going to be watching very closely to make sure that that contractual commitment is lived up to by these companies. And that is part of a really big change in how performers are going to experience their work lives. And especially during the time between seasons, during that hiatus time. So we're really, at least speaking for me, I'm really excited about that, and I'm thrilled that it's applicable now to all of the AMPTP companies as well, because I think that really does mean there is a change in the industry. It's not an outlier; it is going to be the new rules.
And just one more thing about that is. Ben had said something, and I don't know if everybody understood what he referred to. He said, Stacey Travis, so he says you're one phone call away, meaning as actors, as artists, we're one phone call away from getting that series regular job, that recurring character job, getting into that money break world. So this is literally what we're trying to do, is create this most powerful position that an actor can be in when they're working under these contracts, and to help the many. That's why we move the numbers. That's why we could sort of encompass more. Over the decades, we've seen series regulars being sort of actually recurring characters, if not guest recurring, just they don't get that title. So this is just basically going preemptively, like, okay, we see what's happening. We're going to try to figure out a way that we can empower the most actors that we can. Each and every single one of you out there, each and every single one are series regulars. In fact, not only are you series regulars, you're number one on the call sheet. Know that. And that's what we're working for. We got to begin really getting these kind of safeguards in place, get that foundation so that we can all become stronger, more powerful, more in control of our careers, and get paid.
Hear, hear.
And I would just add, Ben, that I think this negotiation really illustrated some of the ways that we can be powerful as a union, not just member solidarity, but the importance of long-term strategy, and on the one hand, and on the other hand, being opportunistic. Both of those streams really crossed in this negotiation, where we were realizing the benefit of a legislative strategy that went into effect years ago and that we have been doggedly pursuing for years, and that long-term strategy paid off. And at the same time, we saw some unique opportunities that were presented by the circumstances of this negotiation, and we were nimble enough to seize them and get those gains. So just shows some of the elements that really come together to produce the type of results that we want to see for our members.
Beautiful. Well, I'm certainly, this has been a very inspiring process for me. I'm so grateful to my fellow committee members, to all the members over the years who continue to share their stories, to reach out, to let staff and their fellow elected leaders know what's going on, for everybody's thoughtfulness over the long term, like I've mentioned a couple times, to be able to have huge gains for background performers and stunt community and the dubbing community, which I've been able to participate in myself, and seeing the challenges there, to our Spanish language performers, certainly, our series regular performers. And I'm so thrilled to have been part of a process that has so many gains for so many people. I really appreciate all of you for taking the time to view our discussion today. Duncan, Ray, Michelle, thank you so much for being here and sharing your thoughts. I would encourage everybody who's eligible to vote, please go to sagaftra.org/Netflix2022. That's sagaftra.org/Netflix2022. You can read more about the agreement, information on how to vote, which you can do so electronically I timed myself when I voted, and I think it took me a total of 27 seconds. And that's because I didn't have my postcard handy. So if you have your postcard handy, it's probably closer to 12 seconds. Voting is open until 5 p.m. Pacific on Wednesday, August 31st. So I please do hope that you make your voice heard. If you have fellow members, please send 3 other members the link to this recorded presentation so that they can be informed, know what's in the contract, know what they're voting on. So I absolutely encourage you all to do that. Again, thank you all so much for being here to discuss this groundbreaking agreement. And as a reminder to everyone watching, the presentation is available as a replay on the YouTube channel. You can watch it anytime. Like I said, send it to friends, send it to family, let our community know what's happening and about this contract. On behalf of the whole team here at SAG-AFTRA, I want to thank you all for watching. And as always, a special thanks to our regular viewers who've been tuning in each week to our PTEOE, President's Task Force on Education, Outreach, and Engagement live streams. If you have ideas for topics you want to see us cover, please do shoot us an email, pteoe@sagaftra.org. And before we go, if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to SAG-AFTRA's YouTube channel to get updates on all of the content that we are posting. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Thank you all for being here.